With the cold season creeping around the corner and the festivities starting to make their presence known on the streets and general media, I realized the year is wrapping itself up. 2021 was a year that definitely had its fair share of rough moments for me personally, but there was also a lot of good content that helped me through some tough times. So what better time than this to reflect on the things that brought me joy and share them with all of you who might be on the lookout for something worth your time. Keep in mind, not all of these necessarily came out this year, but this was the time I either found out about them or got to enjoy them. So sit back, relax, maybe take some notes, and let's get to it. In the last couple of years, Netflix has graced horror fans with a lot of decent titles to keep us entertained during the spooky season. Although we have a huge amount of horror movies, I'd say there isn't a whole lot of shows that focus on this particular category. We do have some dark-themed titles such as The Walking Dead, Stranger Things, or Hannibal, but to include these in the top horror TV shows list would be a stretch in my opinion. Enter Mike Flanagan. Mike Flanagan is a movie director best known for his horror films such as Hush and Ouija Origin of Evil. In 2018, Flanagan started a series on Netflix called The Haunting of Hill House, which was followed by a spiritual successor standalone second season called The Haunting of Bly Manor. If you've watched both shows, it becomes obvious that its director has a very specific format for his TV work. Short, independent shows that convey a spooky, almost campfire-like ghost story. These shows focus on a fantasy-oriented supernatural horror instead of a more real-lifey kind of story such as a slasher or gore horror movie. And surprisingly enough, they deliver. Both Hill House and Bly Manor tell a story of a haunted house surrounded by mystery that relies heavily on an ever-present tension rather than cheap jump scares, which I highly appreciate. I can recommend watching any of the two seasons, but what I'd like to focus on today is Flanagan's latest work, Midnight Mass.
We tend to dislike mysteries. We feel uncomfortable not knowing.
It's okay to just look at the world and say why, I don't understand. Why?
Midnight Mass tells a story of a small, isolated town of Crockett Island and the people who inhabit it. The show starts off with a pretty normal vibe of any other drama show. Some people return to their families in the island after years away from it. Others move in because they've got a job there, while others struggle with the fact they've lived there their entire lives. The main plot takes place with the arrival of a new priest in town who tries to fit in with the community and care for them. The show touches on several deep topics such as addiction, redemption, religion, community, and for the most part, it captures it in a really believable way. The season starts off slowly, and it's not until a few episodes in that the big thing is presented to the viewer. From there, the mystery goes into a crescendo until the end of the season. As other Mike Flanagan's work, the show revolves around a supernatural theme, which I won't spoil because I think it would take a lot from the mystery surrounding the island. You might recognize some of the other cast members if you've watched any of the other series I mentioned, as they make a reappearance in Midnight Mass, kinda like how American Horror Story reuses some of its cast throughout the seasons, which I thought was a pretty nice touch as the familiar cast keeps on delivering pretty good performances. One great addition to the cast is Hamish Linklater, as he completely nails the character of the priest with his charisma and great acting overall. Trust me, you'll like him too. Even though for me personally this wasn't the scariest, spooky show of the director's work, I think the story was one of the most compelling and creative ones. I highly recommend this and the other Haunting of series I mentioned if you're a fan of a good ghost story, or if you're just in a mood for a tense, albeit not super scary, but thrilling experience.
First of all, there's no backstabbing going on here.
It's time for me to move on.
This will be Phil's last year as the coach of the Bulls.
Are the expectations way too high?
Where do we go from here?
The only question, how long can it last?
The Last Dance is a documentary series that tells the story of the era of Michael Jordan and his time as a basketball player for the NBA team Chicago Bulls during the 90s. Now you might be thinking, this isn't really for me, as you might not be that interested in old basketball players, and I would totally get it, except I'm not a basketball fan myself, or even a sports fan for that matter. What the synopsis of the show fails to tell you is that this is also a story about hard work, commitment, leadership, and the unstoppable drive that will lead a person to go beyond everyone's expectations to become the best of their time. That force being extreme competitiveness. This is another Netflix show, and fortunately its production does not disappoint. Every aspect of a good story is firing on all cylinders. The series touches on several aspects of Michael Jordan's professional life, from his early beginnings to the last game of his career. They also show some aspects of his personal life and how it affected his performance as a player and his business decisions. Though the bigger part of the story is concerning Michael Jordan's success, it brings up what that cost him at times without portraying him either as a hero or a villain, but as a person whose most important thing in life is to win no matter the cost. I was born in the early 90s, so a lot of what happens on screen happened before I was old enough to realize its magnitude. But it's undeniable to say that that sports era created its own culture which spread way beyond the sports world. Basketball is not a big thing here in Portugal, and yet these events brought the NBA and its icons to the country. I might have been a kid when all this took place, but I still knew who Michael Jordan was, just like everybody else. And I even remember seeing kids wearing Chicago Bulls merch, probably not even knowing what it was about. Like I said, I'm not a basketball fan, but this was still pretty inspiring to me because it shows what one can achieve when they are willing to work hard enough to overcome any obstacle with the sole goal of becoming the best in their game. I've always loved video games, but I usually tend to stay away from TV adaptations of games and vice versa. So when I heard Netflix just released a TV show based on the ever so popular game League of Legends, I immediately got up on my high horse so I could scoff at it from above with the same disdain I've had for the game and its popularity over the years. And boy am I glad I fell off of that high horse and face planted onto the ground, because I watch it anyway and the show is amazing.
As time passes, the topsiders are leaving us further and further behind. There's never enough to go round. It can either break you or forge you into something greater.
Hi.
There are people down there hell-bent on destroying us.
The only way to defeat Topside is to stop at nothing.
We should prepare our own countermeasures.
Imagining yourself a hero. I'm afraid this will be a very short reunion.
If you're wondering whether you should have some context on what the game is, or how it's played, or even its story before jumping into Arcane, I'm here to tell you not to worry, because I had basically no understanding of the game, and that didn't hold me back from enjoying the show in the slightest. Arcane introduces us to the universe of which the game League of Legends is part of, and focuses on the origin story of a few characters that take part in that universe. Its initial premise is not anything too crazy that will blow your mind. It mostly revolves around good versus evil and the contrasting realities of different social classes in society. It does so by developing interesting and charismatic characters at a satisfying pace without rushing or stalling any of the sometimes predictable yet greatly executed outcomes. When I first sat down to watch what I thought would be a fan service show, which definitely wouldn't be for me, and pressed play, even before I was remotely interested in the plot, I was stunned by the audio quality presented. If you have access to a surround sound audio system, I encourage you to plug it in and turn it up, because man, the sound packs a punch. The soundtrack brings a plethora of big names in the music industry. We got Imagine Dragons, Woodkid, Pusha T, freaking Sting? Everyone's here. It's like the Smash Ultimate of soundtracks. And since we're on the topic of sound, oh my god, the voice acting, mwah! Everyone brings their A game without skipping a beat. There wasn't a single character I didn't find convincing or talented and vibrant. And speaking of vibrant, did I tell you this show looks glorious? World design, cinematography, art style, it all blends together beautifully. Arcane displays a combination of 2D with 3D animation that adds such a great dynamic to the show. Some scenes explore this creative freedom in a way that reminded me of the different styles of Love, Death and Robots, another Netflix show I also highly recommend for a few bursts of thought-provoking short films. Almost every episode has a musical section, either during an intense combat scene or while presenting a new environment, where it feels like we're watching a high-production music video embedded into the episode, and it really shines and brings out the best of what this show can do technically. I wish I could show you a snippet of some of these, but I wouldn't want for my first video to be taken down by a copyright claim, so I'll let you find out for yourselves, and you can tell me in the comments which musical section was your favorite. Arcane came both as a surprise and a shock to me. I was not prepared for such an amazing quality animation series, and if you told me in 2021 I'd be making a video about a TV adaptation of League of Legends, I'd call you mad. So glad I was wrong though. Shonen anime is a category of Japanese animation that is commonly characterized by a single young male protagonist whose adventure usually develops into overcoming an insurmountable task, such as defeating a highly powerful enemy depicted by several sequences of explosive action scenes. I'm not really into shonen anime. I mean, I watched Dragon Ball as a kid, but who hasn't really? I'm usually pretty picky when it comes to my anime preferences. Nowadays my taste is more towards a happy slice of life or a mystery genre, and most shonen just sounds a bit childish and a bit too the more I scream the stronger I get type of deal, but boy oh boy let me tell you about Jujutsu Kaisen. Jujutsu Kaisen starts off as any other shonen anime, with our protagonist Yuji Itadori, a happy-go-lucky high school student who, despite excelling in sports and inexplicably having superhuman physical abilities, would rather be part of the school's unpopular supernatural club with a couple of his equally unpopular friends. One night, Yuji's friends get a hold of a cursed artifact, a mummified finger of a legendary evil sorcerer which ends up summoning cursed spirits, who eventually snatches them in the hopes of acquiring the artifact for themselves. And this is now the time for our protagonist to go on a rescue mission. This is when Yuji meets and teams up with Megumi Fushiguro and Satoru Gojo, a couple of sorcerers searching for the same artifact's whereabouts. During the fight against the demon, or curse as they call it, Yuji becomes overwhelmed by the power of the curse and, with his back against the wall, swallows the mummified finger and becomes now a living vessel for the evil sorcerer's spirit. Yuji, now possessed by an evil entity, somehow is able to control the legendary sorcerer, which in turn gives him the power to overcome the demon. Upon this, Megumi and Gojo realize the spirit of the powerful Sukuna is now alive, and figure the best course of action is to train Yuji in the arts of Jujutsu sorcery, in order to master and contain Sukuna's evil power within him. Not too long after this, our hero learns that this was merely one of the 20 fingers of Sukuna, which sends him and his new group of sorcerer companions on the quest to find all other 19 fingers before they end up on the wrong hands. Get it? Cause it's fingers and hand. Kaisen presents a somewhat typical cast of characters in other shonen. You got your stoic, silent type companion, the unexpectedly overpowered one, the tsundere girl, but it also showcases a good amount of unique and quirky characters. Take a look at one of my favorites, Aoi Todo. Todo is first introduced as this brute who takes pleasure in overpowering less experienced jujutsu students and establish dominance over them. Later on though, we realize that his biggest motivation isn't as simple as breaking the weak, but he does so in order to find a worthy opponent who can challenge his might and push his genuine love for fighting to the limit. And when the show reveals this side of the character, he becomes someone truly respectable and one of the funniest, hypest, and most memorable characters of the season. Jujutsu Kaisen is not the most innovative or original shonen anime out there, but what it does right. If you're looking for a hype-heavy, action-packed anime to watch with a great balance of adrenaline-induced fight scenes, impressive animation, and lighthearted comedy moments, do not sleep on Crunchyroll's 2021 Anime of the Year, Jujutsu Kaisen. The world of anime and manga is relatively new to me, so when I find something I get really absorbed in and tell my friends about it, I usually get this reaction that feels like they're wondering how long I've been living under a rock. My latest big discovery has been Berserk. If like me you only know Berserk by its name, or not even that, it's one of the most impactful manga of all time. Not only has it been around since the late 80s, it's still going to this day, now almost 35 years later, with a whopping total of 40 book volumes containing over 350 chapters, multiple anime movies, several anime series, and even its own video games. This manga is so renowned its influence spreads across several mediums, including other big-name manga titles and highly popular games. Ever since I can remember, my favorite form of entertainment has been video games. So throughout my life I've played my fair share of titles, including one of my favorites, Dark Souls. Back when Dark Souls came out in 2011, I had no idea what Berserk was. I'd heard people mention Dark Souls had taken plenty of inspiration from the series, and now revisiting the Souls universe, it's pretty obvious it's everywhere. And as a new Berserk fan, it's just a joy to witness and recognize the references. Berserk tells the story of a man named Guts, an orphan raised by bandits in medieval times, surrounded by the violence of battlefields and the mercenaries that raised him. Due to the violent reality Guts grew up in, his young boy innocence is taken from him, and soon enough rage and battle is all he knows and is driven by. The first 3 volumes of the manga contain the first story arc, and they basically presents us with the sort of sneak peek of what's to come and who Guts is as an adult. The relentless demon hunter Black Swordsman, infamous for his black armor and man-sized sword. But it's the second arc, called The Golden Age, where this story truly starts to shine for me. This is when we get all the context that helps us understand how Guts becomes the man he is, his fiery rage, and his ever unyielding quest for revenge. Golden Age is a 3-year period of Guts' life where he finds a mercenary group led by the charismatic Griffith, a skilled swordsman who puts Guts' mettle to the test in a duel. Upon suffering a defeat at the hands of Griffith, Guts is recruited to be the newest member of his group, the Band of the Hawk, which gives way to the arc. I'm trying to stay away from any spoilers to the series, but what you can expect is a manga that is full of passion and emotion that is brought to life by Kentaro Miura's stellar illustration. The details of his work never cease to amaze in any given scenario. From visceral fight scenes with tens of fighting army men, to the most quiet and absolute serene landscapes in the often moments of respite. If this sounds like something up your alley, I should leave a big trigger warning. Berserk is not a light manga to read, nor is it for the faint of heart. It leans towards a fantasy horror kind of manga multiple times throughout its series, and it goes deep and explicitly into dark topics such as sexual violence, multiple forms of abuse, and very graphic displays of gore and bloody imagery. Up until now, I've read and enjoyed a few slice of life kind of anime, and I haven't really appreciated other more violence-oriented content. So you might be wondering, what makes something so violent, so grim and dark click for me? Well, beneath its bloody surface, Berserk is a journey of companionship, leadership, and about being part of something greater than oneself. It's about fighting against corruption and idolatry, not just to deities, but to one's obsessive dreams. It's about overcoming the odds of fate, about sacrifice, betrayal, loneliness, deep trauma, and the slow process of healing. It's definitely not a happy story, but it's all about humanity and the hardships of life. Like I mentioned before, this story has been around for decades and it has yet to meet its conclusion. Sadly though, the series creator Kentaro Miura suddenly passed away earlier this year, and the manga's future is still yet to be determined. I understand this manga isn't for everyone due to its violent nature, but for me it has been one of the most gripping and emotional pieces of media I've consumed in the past few years, and each night I look forward to shutting down my devices and immerse myself in this dark fantasy world. If reading isn't really your thing, but you're still intrigued by this, you might want to consider the 90s anime series, not to be confused with the most recent 2016 3D adaptation, which from what I've read multiple times is not really that good, but I don't know, I haven't watched myself, so take that as you will. The 90s anime covers most of the Golden Age arc, setting up the origin of our protagonist, so I think it would be a good entry point for the series. I'm 20 volumes into the manga, and I'm in no rush to finishing it. But I had to include it in this list, as it's been such an impactful and emotional journey for me. Highly recommend it. If you know me personally, it may not come as a surprise that I get bored pretty easily. So every once in a while, I try exploring new activities to keep my rat brain entertained. One thing that I recently found interesting enough to explore myself is hardware disassembling and fixing. So when I found out there's an indie game from the same creator as the highly acclaimed Monument Valley games, precisely on this topic, I knew I was in for a good time.
You ever wonder why we get so attached to things? When you think about it, all this stuff we own is just screws and wires. Except sometimes it isn't. Even the smallest object can hold the biggest meaning. But when it all falls apart, how do we put things together again?
Assemble with Care sets us up in the 80s and tells the story of Maria, a foreign traveler passing by the small town of Ballariva. Soon after her arrival, we learn that she's pretty good at restoring antiques, which will very much come in handy to the people of Ballariva. Each chapter of the game starts off with an interaction between Maria and the local characters represented with these charming-looking minimalistic illustrations narrated by a pretty good cast. The game introduces its mechanics with a prologue level, handing you the briefcase Maria arrives with and asking you to unpack it. There you are able to inspect the item, unclasp its locks, and pick up its contents one by one as Maria reflects on what each item means to her. The following level introduces a little girl with a broken Walkman. You know, the old portable cassette players. Once we fix it, we learn that the tape she was attempting to play is an old recording of her late mother singing a lullaby, adding meaning and sentimental value to the otherwise mundane item. This becomes a recurring theme in Assemble with Care, wrapped around the gameplay mechanics. You get to meet the people of Ballariva, learn about their lives, their problems and concerns, and as they start getting familiar with you, they start relying on you for help. This lovely game is composed by 13 chapters which I went through in one sitting in about an hour and a half. It's a pretty neat Saturday morning kind of game that put me in an upbeat mood for the rest of the day. And if you enjoy tinkering around with objects in a lighthearted setting surrounded by good characters, I'm sure it will do the same for you. I'm not sure how to introduce this next game because it is pretty different than what I usually play, and to be completely honest, I'm not sure how this game got such a strong hold of me this year. I'm talking about Amid Evil, a first-person shooter with a gameplay movement that will most likely bring old Quake fans a sense of deja vu. But instead of shooting guns, you get swords, shoot spells out of a staff, and a claw that shoots whole-ass planets? I kid you not, this is straight out of the game's description. You play as an anonymous champion, whose purpose is to aid ancient gods, whose presence is only ever manifested through a voice from the sky, in defeating a mysterious evil force who appeared and corrupted the realms. Though there is plenty of information to fill you in on the lore of this game, where Amid Evil really shines is in its gameplay. You start off in a hub world where you can choose the difficulty and the world you want to play in. Each world usually contains 2 different levels followed by a boss section. There, the game provides you with all the weapons and equipment you should require to beat the boss, and it drops you in a room with a pretty huge creature whose sole purpose is to put everything you learned so far to the test by beating you to a pulp. The game has this very obvious retro style tweaked for the modern era, and it forces you to move around at a fast pace in order to dodge enemies' attacks and projectiles, much like the more recent Doom games. The action can be so intense it almost feels like you're playing a bullet hell game sometimes. The levels of Amid Evil contain several puzzles that, although they're usually not too difficult to figure out, sometimes they can be a bit too subtle due to the openness of each section. Most time you'll find a locked gate that requires you to explore other areas first in order to find the respective key. Exploring each world is never a dull task though, due to the outstanding level design. The levels are outworldly and creative, each one with its own types of enemies and unique style. Sometimes you're dropped in an open sky ruins, while other levels will send you to space requiring you to dive up into floating balls of water. Yep, floating balls of water. This game is great fun, and if you're not really in it for the story, you can do whatever I do and boot it up whenever I want to turn my brain off and shoot my way through waves and waves of enemies while listening to a podcast or just casually chatting with a friend. For old school shooter fans, this is a must. Or if you're itching for a different yet fun single-player shooter experience, this is a must-try. As you can probably tell by now, I love indie games. And what I love most about indie developers is the creative freedom they apply to their work. Since the development isn't tied to an external publisher or someone pressuring for a product that aligns with what the mainstream consumer is familiar and comfortable with, the possibilities to what an indie game can become are limitless. And this freedom has been celebrated in so many different and in such unexpected ways that we can often easily tell whether a game is made by an indie studio or not. Just to name a few, we have dating simulators where instead of dating people, we date pigeons, or weapons that gain a human form, or even war tanks looking for love. We have puzzles that introduce a peculiar mechanic of which the game revolves around, such as time traveling or perspective, or my favorite kind, a story-driven narrative. I played multiple story-focused indie games where the story, although brilliantly told, was conveyed in a traditional manner. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a more conservative approach to storytelling, but I think the more memorable games that end up standing out as time passes are the ones that are also daring. I've recently played a title called Before Your Eyes. It tells the life story of our bodiless first-person view character Ben. The game starts off with Ben being carried away somewhere in a limbo place of the afterlife on a ferry boat. Ben is told by a mythical ferryman that before he can move on in the afterlife, we must present his life story to the gatekeeper, who will then determine Ben's soul's fate. And to do so, we must first travel through his lifelong memories so the ferryman can learn about who Ben was before presenting his case to the gatekeeper. The catch of the game is, as we visit each of Ben's most impactful memories, we can only stay and explore said memory as long as we, the player, don't blink. The way this is achieved by the game is that it uses your webcam to track your eyes and reacts whenever you blink. And when you do blink, the current memory you find yourself in is skipped. This can at first seem like a simple gimmick, but as we progress in this emotional adventure, we realize that this very accessible way of controlling the flow of the narrative also carries its meaning, as life literally advances in the blink of an eye. Several times I teared up trying to hold my eyelids open just so I could stick around a memory for a little while longer to be sure I wouldn't miss anything. Before Your Eyes is a beautiful, thought-provoking, heartbreaking experience that might put your own life and decisions into perspective, as it shows how any life is precious and should be appreciated in spite of its hardships. These were the things that content-wise brought me the most joy in 2021. If you made it so far into the video, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate you giving the video a shot. And if you yourself have any media that you would like to share that has been impactful for you this year, let me know down below in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. You can also find me on Discord and on Instagram, and the links are provided in the description. Again, thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.